Get that trash off my stage and get him out of my sight." Selina Thorne's voice tore through the silence of the boardroom, her heels clicking aggressively against the polished mahogany floor. She grabbed the handful of technical notes Arthur Vance had been desperately trying to show her and fed them into the industrial shredder at the corner of her desk. She didn't look at him. She didn't even acknowledge that a human being was standing before her. She was the CEO of Aegis Tech, the woman who had just landed the most lucrative government contract in the company's history, and she had no patience for a janitor who smelled like cleaning solvent and desperation. She didn't know that every single line of code in the billion-dollar OmniGrid system, the very project she was launching in an hour, was written by the man she had just humiliated. And the moment she shredded those pages, she unknowingly triggered a dead man's switch that Arthur had buried deep within the architecture 15 years ago, a silent failsafe that would wipe Aegis Tech from the global grid in exactly 60 minutes. Arthur didn't scream. He didn't plead. He simply adjusted his glasses, looked at the shredder, and then at Selina with an expression that was terrifyingly calm. "You have no idea what you just did," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "I'm not here for the job, Selina. I was here to save your life. Now it's too late." He turned on his heel and walked out of the boardroom, leaving a room full of suits in bewildered silence. Selina laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. Typical. A janitor with a god complex. Security, make sure he never steps foot in this building again. "It's yours, and so inwalo frown." Arthur didn't look back at the security guards rushing toward him. He had bigger problems. His phone vibrated in his pocket, a notification from the city hospital. It was a reminder for Chloe's surgery, the one she wouldn't be getting because Selina had just terminated his contract, and with it, his health insurance. Arthur walked out into the cool morning air, his chest tightening. He hadn't been fired from a tech company. He had been fired from the only life support system his daughter had left. He reached his rusted 2008 sedan and sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, staring at the Aegis Tech tower looming above him like a glass monolith. 15 years ago, Arthur Vance hadn't been a janitor. He had been the lead architect of the company's foundational security layer. He had been a man who believed in the promise of technology to make the world safer, a man who had built Aegis from a two-man startup in a garage into the behemoth it was today. That was before the crash, the glitch that had killed his wife, Clara. The internal investigation had been short, brutal, and entirely fabricated. They blamed the driver, they blamed the weather, they blamed anything but the lines of code Arthur knew were flawed. When he tried to speak up, he was silenced, his credentials revoked, his reputation systematically dismantled by the man who was now Selina's right hand, Marcus. Arthur had spent the last decade in the shadows, waiting for his moment, working the lowest jobs in the industry just to keep his eyes on the architecture he had birthed. He had kept his identity secret, using aliases and low-profile accounts, all to keep Chloe safe. But today, the safety was gone. He picked up his phone and checked his daughter's medical portal. Access denied. Selina hadn't just fired him, she had purged his family from the system. He stared at the screen, the rage rising in his throat like bile. He wasn't just an architect, he was the creator. And he knew that when a creator decides to abandon his creation, the creation tends to fall apart. He pulled his laptop from his bag and connected to the hidden wireless node he had planted in the building's infrastructure months ago. The interface loaded, glowing blue in the dim car interior. He wasn't hacking the system, he was simply asking it to remember its father. The 60-minute countdown had already started on the Aegis servers. Somewhere on the 40th floor, Selina Thorne was probably already walking toward the stage, oblivious to the fact that her digital empire was about to be erased from history. Arthur started the engine. He didn't have much time, and he had a lot of work to do if he wanted to ensure that while the company fell, his daughter remained standing. The hospital was 30 minutes away, but the digital battlefield was right here in the palm of his hand. He began to type, his fingers moving with a fluid, haunting precision he hadn't used in a decade. Every keystroke was a command to the past, a ghost from the early days of Aegis surfacing to reclaim its territory. Selina Thorne walked into the launch hall, the applause of the tech elite washing over her like a warm tide. She felt invincible. The OmniGrid was the future, and she was the face of it. She took the stage, the lights blinding, the cameras focused on her every move. She didn't notice that in the back of the room, the main display screen flickered just for a millisecond, a tiny, imperceptible blip in the data stream. On the stage, she began her opening speech, her voice projected across the hall with perfect clarity. "Today," she declared, "we change the way the world moves." But deep within the server core, the data streams weren't moving anymore. They were being archived, locked away, and then systematically deleted. Arthur wasn't trying to just crash the system. He was migrating the company's proprietary code, the soul of Aegis Tech, into a private server where it would be held hostage. If Selina wanted her company back, she would have to pay a price she hadn't anticipated, and it wouldn't be in money. The atmosphere in the launch hall was electric, a symphony of expensive suits and hushed anticipation. Selina Thorne was in the middle of describing the seamless integration of OmniGrid when the first glitch occurred. It was subtle, a slight stutter in the giant holographic projection behind her. The crisp 4K rendering of the city's power grid flickered, turning into a pixelated mess for a heartbeat before stabilizing. Selina didn't miss a beat. She was a professional. She chalked it up to a minor power surge and continued her speech. But in the control booth, the lead engineer's face had gone pale. His monitors were flashing warnings that shouldn't have been possible. The system's kernel, the heart of Aegis, was being rewritten in real time by an outside source, a source that bypassed every firewall, every patch, and every security protocol they had spent millions to implement. "Ma'am," a frantic voice whispered in her earpiece, but Selina ignored it, her focus entirely on the investors in the front row. She was selling a dream, and she couldn't afford for the dream to show cracks. Deep under the building, in a restricted server room that no longer existed on the official blueprints, Arthur Vance watched the migration progress bar crawl toward completion. 14%. He was sitting on a cold concrete floor, his laptop balanced on his knees, his eyes reflecting the rapid-fire lines of green and white code. He wasn't rushing. He knew the architecture better than any of the experts Selina had hired. He knew the blind spots, the hidden tunnels, and the back doors he had built as an insurance policy when he was 22 and naive enough to think he could trust his partners. He didn't just want the system to fail. He wanted to reclaim his work. Every subroutine, every proprietary algorithm, every line of logic that had generated billions in revenue for Aegis Tech was being funneled into a secure, encrypted cloud he alone controlled. As the data flowed, he felt the heavy, suffocating weight of the last 10 years pressing down on him. Clara's death, the bankruptcy, the shame of being reduced to a janitor while the people who destroyed his life lived in penthouses. It was all culminating in this sequence. Every click was an act of justice. He checked the status of the hospital portal again. The account was still locked. His anger hardened into something colder, sharper. If Selina wanted to play God, he would show her what happened when the god decided to retire. Back in the hall, the flicker happened again, and this time, it lasted longer. The entire holographic display shifted, the vibrant cityscape of OmniGrid dissolving into a stream of raw, unformatted data. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Selina's smile faltered. She tapped her earpiece again. "What is happening? Get it back on." The engineer on the other end was sweating, his fingers flying across his console. "It's not responding, Selina. It's not a crash, it's an override. Something is. It's like someone is pulling the code right out of the machine." Selina's eyes darted across the room, searching for a culprit, but there was no one, just the terrified faces of her staff and the expectant, growing confusion of her investors. Arthur watched the progress bar hit 42%. He stood up, his legs stiff from the cold, and stretched. He wasn't going to stay here when the crash happened. He had already set the auto-exec timer. He packed his laptop into his worn-out bag, the familiar weight a comfort against his side. He had to get to the hospital. He had to be there when Chloe woke up, regardless of whether he could pay the bill or not. He exited the maintenance closet, the heavy steel door swinging shut with a finality that sounded like a verdict. He walked through the back corridors of the building, past the very people he had worked beside for months, people who hadn't looked him in the eye for 3 years, who had seen him as part of the architecture, no more important than a light fixture or a floor tile. As he reached the service exit, he saw Marcus, Selina's right hand, and the man who had personally signed Arthur's termination notice a decade ago, hurrying toward the control booth, his face a mask of panicked rage. Marcus didn't see him. He was too busy barking orders into his phone, his voice strained and high-pitched. Arthur felt a flicker of grim satisfaction. Let them panic. Let them feel the ground crumbling beneath their expensive shoes. He stepped out into the alleyway, the sun now high and bright. The air felt different today. For the first time in years, the crushing gravity of his situation felt lighter because for once, the game wasn't being played by their rules. He got back into his sedan, the interior hot and stuffy. He glanced at his phone, 34 minutes left until the full wipe. Aegis Tech wouldn't just be offline, it would be hollowed out, a billion-dollar shell with no heart. But Arthur knew Selina. She wouldn't go down without a fight. She would look for a way to recover, a way to blame a hacker, a way to spin this. He had to ensure that the spin wouldn't work. He reached into his glove compartment and pulled out a small, thumb-sized drive. It contained the real investigation files, the ones that had been suppressed 10 years ago, the ones that proved the HX4 engine fault was a design choice, not an accident. He had kept them as a digital shadow, waiting for the right moment. He didn't just want to destroy the company. He wanted to destroy the legacy of the people who had built it on Clara's blood. He started the car, the engine turning over with a tired, rattling protest. As he pulled out onto the street, his phone chirped. A new message from the hospital. Chloe's surgery has been canceled due to an administrative error. Please contact billing immediately. The rage flared again, but he clamped it down. No more billing, he thought. Not today. He was heading to the one place that mattered. He wasn't going to let Selina Thorne determine the future of his daughter. He was going to write a new one. Arthur pulled into the hospital parking lot, his sedan a stark contrast to the line of luxury vehicles near the entrance. He didn't bother looking for a spot. He just nosed the car into a loading zone, killed the engine, and grabbed his bag. The lobby was a sterile, unforgiving maze of fluorescent lights and the hum of industrial air conditioning, a sound he had grown to loathe over the last 3 months. He went straight to the billing office, his footsteps heavy. The woman behind the desk was middle-aged, her face etched with the kind of tired indifference that only comes from years of dealing with people who had run out of options. She didn't look up when Arthur approached. "We've already discussed the payment status, Mr. Vance," she said, tapping at her keyboard. "I told you, without the insurance verification, we cannot proceed with the procedure. The slot has been reassigned." Arthur leaned over the counter, his voice low and vibrating with a restrained intensity that finally made her look up. That account was active this morning. An administrative error didn't cancel it. A request from Aegis Tech did. "I want to speak to the hospital administrator. Now." "I'm afraid that's not possible," she started, but the lights in the office flickered. Not just the desk lamp, but the entire hallway behind her. Arthur's phone pinged. A notification from the server core. Migration 88% complete. The connection was so strong now that it was pulling power from the grid to sustain the transfer speed. The hospital's electronic records were tied into the same regional network that Aegis controlled. As Aegis's mainframes began to fail, the shockwaves were rippling through the city's data centers. "Everything is crashing," a nurse muttered, passing by with a chart. "The whole system is offline." Arthur looked at the billing clerk, his expression unreadable. "You might want to check your system again," he said. He tapped a command on his laptop. The clerk stared at her screen, her jaw dropping. The billing dashboard had vanished, replaced by an override command from the city's emergency medical network. A red banner flashed across every screen in the office. Urgent status. Emergency surgery authorized. All claims prepaid by Aegis Tech Restructuring Fund. Arthur had triggered a bypass, routing the lost funds from his migration directly into the hospital's infrastructure, labeling it as a mandatory settlement. It was bold, it was illegal, and it was the only thing that worked. "You were saying?" Arthur asked. The clerk was shaking, her fingers hovering over the keys. She didn't argue. She pushed a set of forms toward him, her hand trembling. He signed them with a flick of his wrist. As he turned to leave, his phone buzzed again. It was a call from an unknown number. He didn't answer, but a voicemail notification popped up. He hit play as he walked toward the pediatric wing. "Arthur!" The voice was cold, stripped of its usual professional veneer. It was Selina Thorne. "I don't know who you are, but my engineers have tracked the override to a private cloud. They're telling me you've effectively kidnapped the OmniGrid. You think you've won? You've just committed corporate sabotage on a scale that will put you in federal prison for the rest of your life. Unhook the system, or I swear I will find your daughter, and I will make sure she never sees the sun again." The threat hung in the air, chilling him to the bone. Selina wasn't just a corporate shark, she was a predator who played for keeps. She had finally realized that this wasn't about money. It was personal. Arthur stopped in the middle of the hallway, the bustling hospital life moving around him like a river. He looked at the photo of Chloe on his phone's lock screen. He didn't reply to the voicemail. Instead, he opened the shadow files, the ones he had kept since 1982. He didn't just have evidence of the engine faults. He had evidence of Marcus's involvement in the cover-up and evidence that Selina had been funneled insider information to facilitate the merger that had given her the CEO chair. He didn't just have a hostage, he had an entire arsenal. He walked into the recovery ward. Chloe was sitting up in bed, looking small and pale against the oversized pillows. Her eyes lit up when she saw him. "Daddy? Are you here for the surgery?" He sat on the edge of the bed and took her hand, his own trembling now that the adrenaline was beginning to fade. "Yes, baby. Everything is going to be just fine." Outside the room, the world of Aegis Tech was burning. He could see it on the news feed on the wall-mounted television. The stock had halted trading. The building was in a state of emergency. Selina Thorne was facing a revolt from her shareholders and a potential criminal investigation from the SEC. But for the first time in years, Arthur didn't care about the boardrooms or the towers. He cared about the heartbeat monitors. He watched the screen as Selina walked out of the building to a barrage of microphones. She looked disheveled, her mask of perfection finally cracking. He watched her try to speak, to deny everything, but the reporters were already reading off a feed that he had leaked to them, a summary of the suppression of the 2012 reports. He looked at his laptop screen. Migration 100%. The system was his. And for the first time in a decade, Arthur Vance wasn't a janitor. He was the most powerful person in the room. He leaned back in the hospital chair, watching Chloe sleep, and waited for the next move. Selina Thorne was about to learn that when you destroy a man's world, you better make sure he has nothing left to lose. The hospital room was quiet, save for the rhythmic, steady beep of Chloe's heart monitor, a sound that only an hour ago had been a source of agonizing uncertainty. Now, it was a comfort. But as the clock ticked past 3 a.m., the silence was shattered by the sharp, persistent vibration of Arthur's laptop on the bedside tray. A message from an encrypted IP address flashed on the screen. It wasn't from Selina this time. It was from Marcus. "We know where the hospital is, Arthur. And we know you're the one holding the keys to the kingdom. You think you've won? You've only made yourself a target. Give us the access codes, and your daughter walks out of there. Don't, and we'll ensure the administrative error becomes a permanent reality." Arthur's jaw tightened until his teeth ached. They were bluffing, or so he hoped. But he knew Marcus. He knew that beneath the polished veneer of a high-level executive, Marcus was a man who had never felt the sting of a conscience. He had been the one to draft the falsified accident report that ruined Arthur's life, and he had been the one to personally escort Arthur out of the building 10 years ago. Arthur didn't respond to the threat. Instead, he pulled up the hospital's security camera feed, another back door he'd established weeks ago, just in case. He scanned the lobby, the emergency entrance, and the parking lot. A silver SUV, the same one he'd seen parked outside Aegis Tech earlier that week, was idling at the far end of the parking structure, its headlights off. He felt a surge of cold, calculated rage. They were here. Selina wasn't just trying to negotiate, she was trying to eliminate the problem. "Chloe," he whispered, standing up. The little girl stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "Honey, we need to go. Right now." "But Daddy, the doctors. We have to go to a different hospital. It's a special one, just for us." He helped her into her clothes with practiced, rapid-fire efficiency, his eyes never leaving the security feed. The SUV was moving. Two men in dark coats were stepping out, heading toward the emergency entrance. Arthur grabbed his bag, his mind racing. He couldn't go out the front. He looked at the layout of the wing on his screen. There was a service stairwell that led to the laundry tunnels he had mapped out when he first considered the possibility that he might need an exit strategy. "Hold on to my neck, Chloe," he commanded. She obeyed, sensing the gravity in his voice. He swung her onto his back and stepped out into the hallway. The lights flickered again, a residual effect of the server core collapse. He used the cover of the darkness to slip into the stairwell. As he descended, he accessed the hospital's internal paging system, another layer of the grid he had compromised. He keyed in a sequence: Code Blue, main lobby, security breach. Seconds later, the sound of blaring sirens and the heavy stomp of hospital security guards echoed through the vents. He watched on his phone as the two men in the lobby were swarmed by guards, giving him the precious minutes he needed to reach the basement. He pushed open the heavy door to the laundry tunnel. It was dark, smelling of bleach and industrial heat. He walked through the shadows, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had spent his life building systems to protect people, and now he was using those same skills to disappear. He reached the far end of the tunnel, which exited into a maintenance alley 3 blocks away. He climbed the ladder, pushed open the grate, and emerged into the cool night air. His sedan was still where he'd left it, though he knew he couldn't use it anymore. It would be flagged. He tucked Chloe into the back of a parked delivery truck he'd unlocked earlier that evening, then circled around to the driver's seat. He had no destination, no plan beyond survival, but he had the Aegis data. He had the truth. And for the first time, he had the leverage to stop the people who had treated his life like a line of code to be deleted. He pulled the delivery truck out into the city streets, the engine a quiet purr. He looked at the dashboard screen. Selina Thorne was on the news again, standing in front of the wreckage of her career, looking smaller than she ever had before. He didn't just want her to lose the company. He wanted her to understand that she had underestimated the one thing that couldn't be bought or sold, the resolve of a father who had been pushed to the edge. He looked at Chloe in the rearview mirror. She was already drifting back to sleep, her rabbit clutched to her chest. "It's okay, baby," he whispered to the empty air. "Daddy's going to fix everything." He turned the truck away from the city, heading toward the interstate. He had one more stop to make before the sun came up, and it was the one thing he had been saving for the very end. He was going to pay a visit to Marcus, and he was going to make sure that when he left, Marcus wouldn't be able to sign his name to anything ever again. The delivery truck rumbled onto the outskirts of the city, the neon skyline of Columbus fading into the rearview mirror. Marcus's private estate was nestled in a gated community 20 miles north, a fortress of limestone and manicured hedges designed to keep the world away. Arthur knew the layout of the property because 10 years ago, he had been the one to install the security protocols that Marcus still used. Marcus was a man of habit. He believed in the invincibility of his own creation. He didn't realize that every lock, every sensor, and every camera system had a back door that Arthur had left open for a decade. Arthur pulled the truck into a wooded service road near the perimeter wall. He checked on Chloe. She was fast asleep, breathing evenly. He kissed her forehead, his heart aching with a mixture of terror and resolve, and then climbed out into the damp, heavy night. He was no longer the janitor, and he wasn't the broken man who had been fired on Monday morning. He was the architect, and he was here to dismantle the structure of Marcus's life. He reached the maintenance gate and pulled out his phone. He didn't need to pick the lock. He sent a simple packet of data through the local mesh network, a command he'd written years ago. System test. Override authorization Alpha 0. The gate clicked and swung open with a hiss of pneumatic pressure. Arthur walked onto the grounds, his eyes adjusting to the darkness. He knew the camera blind spots by heart. He moved between them with the fluid, ghost-like grace of a man who belonged here more than the person living inside. He bypassed the motion sensors by broadcasting the heartbeat signal of the gardener's dog, a trick he'd perfected long before he ever worked at Aegis Tech. He reached the rear study. The light was still on. Through the glass, he saw Marcus sitting at a mahogany desk, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He was on the phone, his voice sharp and impatient. "I don't care how you find them. Search every hospital in the state. If she wakes up and that girl gets her surgery, the leverage is gone." None. Arthur felt a cold, jagged shiver down his spine. They were still hunting them. He didn't knock. He simply walked to the smart lock panel on the terrace door and keyed in his own administrator code, a code that hadn't been changed in 10 years because Marcus was too arrogant to believe it was still valid. The door slid open with a soft, expensive hum. Marcus spun around, his drink flying from his hand and shattering against the hardwood. He didn't even reach for the panic button. He just stared, his face turning an ashen, ghostly white. "Arthur?" Marcus whispered, his voice catching in his throat. "How are you? The security grid is air-gapped. You shouldn't be able to—" "I didn't break in, Marcus," Arthur said, stepping into the light. He wasn't holding a weapon. He didn't need one. He held his laptop, the screen displaying the Aegis Tech server logs, the 2012 accident report, and the 2016 note from the repair shop. "I walked through the front door of your architecture. You never understood it. You just occupied it." Marcus scrambled backward, hitting the edge of his desk. "Arthur, look, let's talk. Selina is crazy. I can help you. I can give you enough money to go anywhere. Start over." "Start over?" Arthur interrupted, his voice dropping into a register that made Marcus flinch. "My wife is dead because of your start over. My daughter spent months in a hospital bed because of your administrative errors. You didn't just build a system, Marcus. You built a graveyard." Arthur walked toward him, placing the laptop on the desk. He opened the file, the one containing the forensic evidence of the engine fault that had killed Clara. "This goes to the FBI in exactly 5 minutes, along with the wire transfer records showing how you've been siphoning Aegis funds into offshore accounts for the last 3 years. Marcus's eyes widened. He lunged for the laptop, but Arthur moved with the speed of a man who had lived in the shadows for a decade. He grabbed Marcus by the collar, slamming him against the desk. It wasn't violence born of anger. It was the cold, clinical application of force. "The system is finished, Marcus," Arthur said, his face inches from his own. "And you're going to be the one to tell the police where Selina is hiding. Because if you don't, I'll upload these files to every news outlet in the country, and by morning, you'll be a pariah. But if you tell me where she is, maybe, just maybe, the prosecutors will look at you as a cooperating witness instead of the lead defendant." Marcus looked at the screen, then at the man he had once deemed invisible. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a pathetic, shivering realization of his own obsolescence. He knew he was done. She's at the airfield," Marcus stammered, his body sagging. "Private hangar. She's taking the jet to Zurich. She's leaving everything behind." Arthur stepped back, pulling out his phone. He dialed a number, the federal prosecutor he had been communicating with anonymously for weeks. "I have him," Arthur said into the phone, his voice steady. "He's ready to give up the CEO." Marcus stared at him, broken. He hadn't just been defeated by a hacker, he had been defeated by the person he had discarded. Arthur walked out of the room, leaving Marcus to his phone calls and his lawyers, his life effectively dismantled by the ghost of his own past. Arthur climbed back into the delivery truck, his hands finally beginning to shake. He pulled out onto the road, the mission almost complete. He had the truth. He had the leverage, and now he had the destination. He drove toward the airfield, the sky beginning to streak with the first gray light of dawn. The jet would be waiting. The CEO would be waiting. And Arthur Vance, the janitor who had built everything, was finally going to ensure that nobody at Aegis Tech ever treated a man as invisible again. The airfield was a sprawling expanse of concrete and shadow, the early morning fog clinging to the runway like a shroud. Arthur pulled the delivery truck to a halt behind a row of rusted hangars, 300 yards from the private tarmac. Through the gaps in the corrugated metal, he could see the sleek white silhouette of the Aegis corporate jet, its engines already beginning to whine with a high-pitched, insistent power. He checked the back of the truck. Chloe was still asleep, her breathing steady. He felt a wave of relief so intense it nearly buckled his knees. He grabbed his bag, stepped out, and sprinted toward the perimeter fence. He didn't need to cut through the wire. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small, custom-made signal disruptor he'd fashioned from the remains of his old workstation, and keyed in a sequence. The entire airfield's automated lighting system blinked out, plunging the tarmac into a darkness so sudden it felt like a physical blow. The jet's boarding lights flickered, died, and then flared back on as the plane's emergency power kicked in. Arthur scaled the fence. He knew exactly where the pilot would be. The pre-flight check was a manual ritual that couldn't be fully automated. As he sprinted across the open runway, he caught sight of Selina Thorne. She was halfway up the boarding stairs, her coat billowing in the wind, clutching a briefcase that Arthur knew contained the hard drives of her personal financial records. "Selina!" he roared. The sound carried across the silence of the field. She froze, one foot on the metal steps, and turned. Even from 50 yards away, he could see the flicker of recognition and the sheer, unadulterated terror that followed. "Security!" she shrieked, but her security team was already halfway across the airport, diverted by the false emergency alerts Arthur had triggered in the main terminal. She was alone. Arthur didn't slow down. He reached the stairs and bounded up them, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Selina backed away, stumbling into the small, opulent cabin of the jet. You can't be here. You're a janitor. How are you here?" "I was never the janitor, Selina," Arthur said, stepping into the cabin. The interior was smelled of expensive leather and fear. "I was the foundation. You just chose to ignore the cracks." He pulled the evidence folders from his bag, the original accident reports, the wire transfers, the proof that Aegis Tech had been built on a foundation of systemic fraud. He dropped them on the white leather seat. "It's all there. Every ghost you've tried to bury." Selina stared at the pile of paper as if it were a bomb. "You're insane. They'll kill you for this. They'll erase you." "They tried," Arthur said, his eyes locking onto hers. "But you can't erase someone who knows how the machine works better than the people who own it. The FBI is 3 minutes out. Marcus is already talking. You're done, Selina. Not because of me, but because of the truth you were too arrogant to manage." A siren wailed in the distance, the low, pulsing sound of approaching cruisers. Selina looked out the window, then back at Arthur, her face crumpling. The composure, the ironclad coldness, the billion-dollar ambition, it all evaporated, leaving only a woman who had realized her empire was made of paper. "I can give you anything," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Whatever you want. Just tell them I was just following orders." "I can." "You're done," Arthur repeated, the words he had heard on that Monday morning finally coming full circle. He stepped off the plane just as the first blue and red lights began to dance across the runway. Federal agents were swarming the hangar, their guns drawn, their movements precise and aggressive. Arthur didn't run. He walked toward them with his hands raised, his bag hanging loosely from his shoulder. He watched as they climbed the stairs and pulled Selina Thorne from the cabin. She didn't fight. She didn't scream. She just looked at him. A long, lingering look of absolute bewilderment, as if she were trying to understand how a man who held the mop had managed to dismantle the entire world. As the agents cuffed her, the lead investigator walked toward Arthur. He was a man Arthur had spoken to in the dark, the one who had promised to see the HX4 case through to the end. "Mr. Vance?" the agent asked. "Yes," Arthur said. "We have the files. We have the confession from Marcus, and we have the board's cooperation." The agent looked at the jet, then back at Arthur. "You did the impossible." "No," Arthur said, turning toward the hangar where the truck was hidden. "I just performed maintenance." He walked away from the chaos, his pace slow and deliberate. He reached the truck, climbed into the driver's seat, and started the engine. Chloe stirred in the back, her eyes opening. "Daddy? Is it morning yet?" "Yes, baby," Arthur said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's a brand new morning." He pulled out of the airfield, leaving the sirens and the scandal and the glass tower behind. He was driving away from Aegis Tech, away from the man he had been forced to become, and toward a future he had finally earned. He didn't look at his phone. He didn't look at the news notifications popping up. He looked at the road ahead, where the sun was finally breaking over the horizon, painting the sky in colors that weren't gray or sterile or cold. They were real, and for the first time in 10 years, he wasn't carrying a secret. He was just a father taking his daughter home. The industrial district faded into the distance. Arthur drove, the weight of the last decade finally falling away, replaced by a quiet, steady peace. He thought about the 41-page report he had written the night he had been fired, and the way he had felt then, small, defeated, and finished. He hadn't been finished. He had just been waiting for the system to break so he could finally rebuild it the right way. He felt Chloe's hand on his shoulder. "Daddy, can we go home now?" "Yeah, Chloe," he said, turning the wheel toward the interstate. "We're going home." The drive back from the airfield was surreal. The city, which only hours ago felt like a cage designed to crush him, now seemed to be waking up to a different reality. The morning headlines were already breaking. Aegis Tech CEO detained, systemic fraud uncovered at infrastructure giant and buried in the technical columns, original architect of OmniGrid identified as whistleblower. Arthur didn't turn on the radio. He didn't want to hear the sound of his own life being dissected by pundits who hadn't the faintest idea what it cost to hold the truth for a decade. He focused on the rhythm of the road. By the time they reached the suburbs, the sun was fully up, casting long golden shadows across the quiet residential streets. Dorothy, his neighbor, was waiting on her porch when he pulled into her driveway. She looked at the truck, then at Arthur, her eyes softening with a mix of relief and concern. She didn't ask where he'd been or why he'd arrived in a delivery vehicle. She simply walked down the steps and opened the back door. "You're home," she said, taking Chloe's hand. "I'm home," Arthur replied. He watched them walk inside, Chloe still clutching Biscuit, her steps light and steady. He had done it. He had kept his promise. He stood in the driveway for a long time, the engine of the truck ticking as it cooled. His phone, which had been silent for the last hour, suddenly began to blow up with notifications. Emails from the FBI, calls from the board of Aegis Tech, or what was left of it, and a dozen messages from news outlets. He turned the phone off and left it on the passenger seat. He was done with the noise. He walked into his own apartment, the silence greeting him like an old friend. He went straight to his desk, sat down, and opened the document he had been working on for months, the true architecture guide to NextCore Grid. He hit select all and then send to, directing the file to the lead engineer at the Federal Regulatory Office. It was the last piece of the puzzle. The system was now transparent. It was safe. It was his final contribution to a world that had forgotten how to build things to last. He spent the rest of the morning in a haze of exhaustion. He showered, the hot water washing away the grime of the night, and finally, for the first time in 3 years, he crawled into bed without the weight of a secret. When he woke, it was late afternoon. Chloe was sitting on the floor in the living room, building a tower out of the wooden blocks he had bought her the month he started his new job. She was humming to herself, a soft, happy sound. There was a knock at the door. Not the sharp, demanding knock of a process server or an executive, but a soft, hesitant rap. Arthur went to the door and opened it. It was Evelyn. She wasn't wearing her signature corporate blazer. She was in a simple sweater and jeans, looking less like a CEO and more like a woman who had been walking a long way. She stood on the threshold, her hands in her pockets, her gaze leveled at him with a quiet, genuine respect. "The news is all over the city," she said. "The board has been dissolved. They're looking for someone to lead the transition, to rebuild the infrastructure under a new name, something that actually serves the people, not the stock price." Arthur leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed. "I'm not a CEO, Evelyn." "I know," she said, a faint smile touching her lips. "That's exactly why the company needs you. Everyone else in that building spent their careers learning how to sell the system. You're the only one who knows how to make it actually work." She didn't push. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. "I'm not here to offer you a contract. I'm here to ask you, as someone who finally understands what you were protecting, if you'd be willing to consult on the rebuild. Just the technical side, just the stuff that matters." Arthur looked at the notebook, then at Chloe, who had paused her building to watch them. He thought about the 41-page report, the shredded pages, the cold nights in the garage, and the long road he had traveled to get here. "I'll think about it," Arthur said. "That's all I asked for," Evelyn said. She turned to leave, then stopped. "Oh, and Arthur, the hospital records, they're permanent now. The fund you created with the settlement is already processing the payments for the other families on the waiting list. You saved more than just your daughter today." Arthur watched her walk down the hall. He closed the door and locked it, not because he was afraid, but because he finally had a home worth keeping safe. He walked over to the kitchen table, pulled out the chair, and sat down. He didn't think about code. He didn't think about stock prices or boardrooms. He thought about the next 10 years. He thought about Chloe's surgery, the school trips, the Saturday mornings, and the simple, profound joy of having a life that belonged entirely to him. He was finished with the old world, the one built on lies and hidden faults. He was standing on a new foundation now, and for the first time in a decade, he knew exactly how to build it. He reached for the paper on the table, the one with the technical diagram he'd drawn for Luna months ago, and he started a new sketch. Not for a server, not for a jet, but for something simple, something beautiful, something that would last. He was home, and that was enough.